You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network, your host, Philip Kinsella. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an amazing guest on board today. His name is Mark Olly, and I'm going to read a little bit about Mark's bio and his new book, which he has just released through Flying Disc Press. Mark Olly is a writer, TV presenter, public speaker, lecturer and archaeologist with over 30 years experience working in history, media and the arts. His books include Revealing the Green Man, Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries, and co-authored UFO Chronicles, Crashes, Landings and Retrievals. His latest book is now published through Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press, and it's called Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World. Now, what's interesting about Mark is that he knows his stuff, and he's very much admired within all areas of not only pagan and witchcraft, but also ufology. And I think, you know, you've taken a great interest within a large area of these subjects. So welcome on board, Mark. Nice to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, and your list of credentials is quite remarkable. I mean, I've been going through them, and it's like, good Lord, this gentleman knows what he's talking about. But what I want to ask, first of all, is how, Mark, did you get involved primarily with all of these mysteries of life? What was it that spurred you into looking into these areas?
Wow, that is actually a question that not many people have ever asked me before, so I'm quite pleased you asked me that. I suppose the very beginning of it all goes all the way back to me being about 7.5 years of age, and I was in the house that I'm living in now, which is the family home. My dad bought it about 65 years ago, and I was sort of, asleep one night in bed, just kind of minding my own business, and then all of a sudden I was awakened by the fact that the temperature in the room had plummeted to below freezing, and I was really cold. So I woke up in the bed, and the first thing I was looking at as I opened my eyes was a figure of a Victorian gentleman in a green and brown flecked coat, trousers and matching waistcoat with a pocket watch, and his head wasn't far off the ceiling. He was quite tall, and he's staring at me with what appeared to be sort of very dark, piercing, bluey black eyes. But the reason I was a little bit alarmed by this, apart from the fact it was a stranger in my bedroom, is the fact that I could actually see the wardrobe behind him through him. So he's kind of just hanging there in midair, staring at me. So, as is the way of these things, you're frozen in time. And I have no idea how much time elapsed, probably only 30 seconds or a minute of us staring at each other. And then I just dove under the bed covers, like you do. And I stayed under the bed covers for a very, very long time, eventually emerging to find that daylight was breaking and everything was okay, and this guy wasn't there. And that stayed with me. So, of course, you go off then, you start to try and find out this sort of thing is. And there was a lot of there was a publications called Armada books that you could buy back then for children, and it was like the Armada book of ghosts and wizards and witches, the Armada book of flying saucers, spoon bending, Loch Ness monster, you name it, they're all in these books. So I kind of worked my way through all of these books over many years. But then the interesting thing was 11 years later, totally unrelated, going through some family photographs at my auntie's house, what pops out but this gentleman in photographic form. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, who on earth is this? Well, it was a guy called Thomas Trow, who went all the way back to the 1870s, 1880s on the mum's side of my family. And it turns out that he was a Freemason. He was into his Victorian magic, and what I'd obviously seen there was he'd come back to sort of visit me. There was no doubt that it was him. Very distinctive looking gentleman, very distinctive face. And in one of the photographs, he was wearing very similar clothing. And that's how I started. I think that's the first time I've ever officially put that on the record, but that's what got my interest going. Once I started doing the research, I realised, as some people are realising now, it's a very modern view, that everything is interconnected. There are, so many overlaps in all these different areas. Back then, everything was compartmentalized. You sort of bought a book on ghosts, or you bought a book on flying saucers, or whatever, or you bought a book on witchcraft. But actually, the whole thing is interconnected. So that's really how I got started. So that would be 7 years old. Would be 1969.
Good
I would
Lord.
think.
That's the year I was born, in 1969, Mark.
Well, I did start very young.
You did indeed.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, we'll talk about your new book in a little while, but I think it's interesting because in every individual that we've spoken to, whether or not they've been an experiencer or a researcher or whomever, you'll find that a lot of these souls, when they've been touched by elements of the paranormal, it seems to create some kind of shift within their consciousness. Driving them forward, almost kind of like altering their destiny, as it were. And did you feel that, Mark, within yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that the person I was looking at potentially could have been a relative from the past, I sort of felt a real affinity with that. I thought, this guy's, he's been long gone, but he's obviously made the effort to make an appearance, which, he must know full well that that's going to trigger something off in me, being that I was only 7. And of course it did. And then slowly I felt I was sort of growing, if you like, almost into him. But, fast forward a long way, and we're now looking at things like genetics, DNA, race memory, et cetera, et cetera. Who knows what was dropped in time and space to make that happen when it did. Obviously, he must have known something in the past that he knew he could affect me in the future. Well, there's so many. The more I researched into his life, there were so many different overlaps. I would like to think that it was something that was meant to be. The course then that he set me on, in turn, then resulted in me becoming involved in witchcraft and the occult at a very, very young age. I joined a coven in the 1970s when I was a teenager. I then got converted to Christianity in the late 70s, swung the opposite way, ended up training as a vicar, as a minister. So I can, officiate in the AOG, which is a big international church organisation. I did 3 years at Bible College. And then that's took me off again into other things where you go less churchy orientated. You try and reconcile your experiences, and it took me off into all kinds of things. I've researched Freemasonry, all the Knights Orders, the Templars. I'm just producing a book at the moment. I'm sort of partway through it on Christianity before Constantine. So you're looking at, what exactly happened after Christ disappeared, and you've got all these guys like, sat around in a pub going, what do we do next? I'm taking it from that moment, clearly they all sat down and decided they were going to write the Gospels, what do you remember? Yeah, well, I remember this, I remember that, and that's why there's differences, because that's what, witness statements are like. But, and then I'm looking at other things that the church then wasn't quite so happy in embracing and bringing in. So I think it's the right time to do that as well. I kind of, that's a plug for something that's coming in the future, because ultimately I'm hoping to reconcile those beliefs from 2,000 years ago, because I think they're relevant now. You know, I think we're starting a new millennium and it'll take us forward. So hopefully I'll get that finished.
Yes. No,
but I'm in
wonderful.
the middle of it.
Yes, I think, you know, the understanding also, well, you know, with regards to ancient history, the antediluvian cultures is very important. And I think it's wonderful that you've taken a step forward in terms of that, and trying to find the connections between our creation and where we derive from. And myself and many other people ask the same question, so that when you get involved with elements of the paranormal, it's not just one department that you're going to start looking into. It comes with a lot of baggage, so to speak. I think you end up, you know, dealing with one, and then you find yourself with another. And of course, I agree with you totally that in the old days of old, that, you know, everything was decompartmentalized, and we are beginning to realize that there seems to be connections between one phenomena to another. And the way that we translate that information in this form through our consciousness. And I think it's wonderful that the guy that you mentioned, you know, who has crossed over. I'm a great believer in survival of consciousness. We don't know what happens to the core essence of the personality when it gets to the other side, but we know it comes back to connect with us here. So this leads me onto this amazing book, and I have read it. Crystal Skulls and Human Heads by yourself, Mark Olly, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to push the book there, which is what this show's also about. But tell the listeners about this book, because I think they'll find this quite interesting.
Okay, it's not necessarily specifically a book about UFOs. I'll get that out there right at the very beginning. Yes, it has a huge impact on the way we view our existence, and it does reference a lot of issues that are in that ballpark, if you like. But I started out to write something which is archaeoscience. I am an archaeologist, I suppose, by trade, by profession, and also a historian and a writer. So that's kind of the ballpark I was coming from. And under lockdown, I obviously had a lot of spare time on my hands. So it was a case of okay, I've been dying to get this information together and do something with it. So the commonality is in the title. It's the human skull. Obviously, that themes all of the chapters right through the book. But then you can do the whole of humankind, mankind, you know, different species. You can drift into aliens. You can drift into the crystal skulls, depictions of the skulls, belief of the, you know, in the skulls. What does it represent? And then, of course, like you say, it impacts on things like life and death, past and future. You know, it goes off in so many different directions, but it still holds together as a readable, functioning thread. I think I managed to summarize the entire book there, really. So that's kind of where I was coming from, was just to say, well, instead of us doing what so many writers do, where we just go off and reference existing material, why don't I go back and try and get at the absolute bricks and mortar? You know, let's go back and say, this is what it is. This is what we know about it. And what does that really say? So you're stripping away all the layers of nonsense and what have you that's sat over the top, and prejudice as well. There's a huge amount of prejudice.
Oh, yes. You
know, I mean, I tell you what, I've got to put this in as an example because it's just on my mind to do so. It kind of annoys me that you can have some guy, you know, who's sat in a biblical study room, you know, somewhere out in Israel, and he's plowing his way through the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, and he runs across an account of Genesis, and, you know, you've got in the beginning the earth was without form and void, and the spirit moved across the waters of the deep, and this guy sat there looking at this thinking, well, that basically means that at some point in the dim and distant past, you know, the world was flooded. And everyone goes, oh, you can't say that. That's religion. That's religious. This, that, and the other. And then there's a little bloke somewhere in, you know, Antarctica on a core drilling rig. And he's just drilled a core, and he's gone down goodness knows how many hundreds of feet with this core drill. And he pulls it back out, and lo and behold, at a certain depth, oh, look at that. There's evidence of a flood. And everyone goes, oh, that's fantastic. That's science. What a wonderful discovery that is, But then you're dealing now with source materials. On the one hand, you've got a perfectly valid written account from thousands of years ago. And on the other hand, there it is in the actual physical record. So you're not dealing with people's opinions. You're dealing with this is the actual physical information we've got. And the entire book from start to finish, I hope, looks at that position, if you like. It takes that standpoint. It kind of goes, there you have it. We've got it. It physically exists. And if you stick all the ducks in line, this is what it means. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. So, I wanted to sort of blow that paradigm completely away. And so, in the 21st century, we need evidence-driven, actual correct assessment of all this. And do you know what? By the time I got to the end of the book, I was looking at it and I was thinking, well, this is a bit more mysterious and crazy and out there than I thought it was going to be. And all I've done is use the evidence. You know what I mean? I didn't make any of it up. The stuff that people invent actually is disappointing in comparison to what we actually have in reality.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. And I agree with you. And, on this show, we talk about absolutely anything that's involved with supernatural, paranormal, whichever way you want to label it. We're open to all forms of speculation. And one of the things I think is incredible is that when we get to that point when we make an assessment of something, of course, that will upset the apple cart of other people who unfortunately are stuck within their thinking. Now, we have to be very careful. We have to juggle and try to be as respectful as we can. But it's interesting to, when you look into history going back, and certainly into human evolution, which is a big puzzle. There's a big question mark with that. And I always have believed that, we may have been the result of some form of extraterrestrial or maybe interdimensional reality that was modified, created in this form. I mean, as I said before, I'm open to all forms of speculation. Nothing can be proven, but I think it's important when you, as you said, Mark, when you start pulling out the facts or the parts to the puzzle that seem to connect, you will unfortunately stick a lot of noses in the wrong direction.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Recently, you mentioned evolution because I was reading a few scientific papers where they've got this new thing coming through, which I think I include in the book, where now the general consensus of opinion, even when it comes to things like evolution, the scientists are now saying it couldn't have happened without external intervention. So they've not quite gone so far as to say, maybe something literally came along and put us here, but they're getting to the point where they're saying, well, there are changes, there are actual alterations within species that could not happen naturally. They couldn't happen by accident. They're beginning to discover this from the fossil record, where it appears that something has actually been modified. Well, of course, I'd go further than that, and I'd say, well, the whole lot is just one gigantic, design right from day one. That, I think, a vast majority of people would agree with that. It doesn't matter what your religious, philosophical, scientific, whatever your background is. I think everybody looks at the world and just goes, well, this is just not an accident. It's impossible. It cannot be an accident. Mathematics, chaos formula, you name it, wherever you go, all points back to things being better, superior, structurally more stable, etc. In the past. And we do seem to be devolving. Yes, of course, occasionally there's, modification, evolution, things change and adaptation, which really I think is what Origins of Species was all about. It's more about creatures, facing adversity. And then in order to survive and live on, they obviously alter in order to accommodate that. But they don't necessarily alter the DNA. They just alter what they do. And natural selection kicks in. So it's a different process. I don't think the whole evolutionary T-shirt that people wear, you've got a monkey at one side and with a briefcase and a computer at the other side. That's a leap too far for me. I'll be honest. That is a leap too far. I mean, as far as chromosomes and DNA are concerned, we're nearer to a pig than a monkey. I'd love to see one of those actually with a pig, instead of the monkey, and see where that leads us.
Absolutely. And, I think it's remarkable. And of course, what's interesting is that your concept of giants with intelligence who came before us, I think that you want to describe a little bit about that also, Mark, because that is fascinating.
Well, in archaeology, we constantly run across the problem that it's not what we've actually got, it's what we haven't got. That's the problem. You end up with gaps, and you end up with things that are missing, and you end up looking at objects and looking at ritual sites and looking at things from the past. And you have no idea how these things function, no idea what the people were thinking. And I thought, well, let's take that a leap further. Maybe we have no idea who actually built them and made them, and how they functioned. And then, lo and behold, when you go back to the physical evidence, even if you just take what I would call orthodox, middle of the road, standard everyday opinion of beings that lived in the past, there are a lot of skulls, fossilized and otherwise, that have a bigger cranial capacity than we do. So it wouldn't be a radical statement to say, well, if they've got a bigger brain, chances are they're capable of doing a little bit more than we are. The chances are they're probably a bit more intelligent. That has been a measure now for a long, long time, probably 70, 80, 90 years, going all the way back to Victorian times. Internal cranial capacity defines what you would expect from that species. And that, generally speaking, exception, I suppose, being the dolphin, generally speaking, it's true in nature that the bigger brain capacity you've got, the more capable that creature is. But then with humans, it gets really silly because you've got these Paracas skulls and other skulls dotted all over the face of the planet. They're in Egypt, they're in Russia, they're in the UK, they're in the Americas, they're absolutely everywhere. But the Paracas are the best example, where some of the craniums, I think the biggest one I've seen was in an Eric von Daniken article. There was a photograph. It was 3.5 times bigger than a standard human head. And I'm thinking, well, suppose when that guy was born, he was lucky enough to have a talent like, say, Einstein. Yeah. And I was thinking, well, you're talking about a guy walking around there with 3.5 Einsteins stacked on his shoulders. That is one hell of a piece of software. You know what I mean? What that guy would have been capable of in every department, because the book itself goes into this. We look at how brains function, what brains do, what would be the consequence of making it bigger. And I do sort of run over that because I didn't want to sort of destroy the people that were reading it. I didn't want to pop everybody's heads, literally. But the giant skull guys must have been amazing. And I've said this before, if you got like 10 of those guys in a room and you walked in and you went, hey, I've got this idea, fellas, let's build a pyramid. They'd all like scribble away on a piece of notepaper, and within 2 or 3 minutes, they'd have told you how to do it. They'd have all the mathematics there. They'd have how to move the blocks. They'll have, what it'll do. And because of their increased capacities, I think they were better suited for life on Earth. I think they slotted in almost seamlessly to their environments. And the archaeology kind of backs this up. You go looking for a Celtic village, for example, in this country, you go excavating, remains of roundhouses and stuff like that, and they've left virtually nothing behind. Environmentally, they must have been so in touch with what was around them and almost on a Native American Indian level, where they just, came in, lived there for 600 years, wander off, and nobody even knows they've been there, which is in complete contrast to the sort of, Greek, Roman, we came, we saw, we conquered kind of philosophy, which we've got now, where we're dominating the planet. So I think the people in the past, these people they're less visible. They're more in the background, and worst of all, they're missing. We've lost them. I mean, the Paracas skulls, 400, 500, 600 years ago, these guys were walking around fully alive, and then European disease, European conquest, conquistadors, etc., arrived and effectively, wiped them out. They must have known what was coming as well, being that they were so intelligent, and they've disappeared, and we've lost them. Absolutely. So I don't think we were top of the the tree of human species by a long shot.
Yes, yes, and definitely I think that within most of the scientific establishments, as you well know and as we know, and I'm not even scientific, that a lot of them have stuck to the official narrative of their version of how it all was. But I do believe myself personally, like you, that, you know, our history is wrong. I think Eric von Däniken said the same thing, and that's been rewritten. And anything that contradicts the official narrative, if any new models or evidence comes forward, is quickly, hushed up. So I think that, I think all of this is starting to come out, not only through, wonderful, brilliant researchers and writers like yourself, but also that we have to reevaluate our place here on this planet. Yes. And I think that this is now beginning to cause a shockwave throughout all the communities that people are waking up. Now, interestingly, I remembered also the crystal skulls. The only time that I have been introduced to them, the first time actually, was during one of Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World programs when I was a kid. Yeah. And I was very interested, but not fully aware or understanding of the historical nature of crystal skulls, because that's another element and a great part of research that you've been exploring, isn't it, Mark?
Yes, very much like yourself. My introduction to the Mitchell Hedges Skull was Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, which I think I've still got the book on the shelf with it on the cover. And I sort of looked at that and I thought, oh, yeah, that's a really nice object. And then I just kind of moved on from that. Although, a lot of people questioned it, doubted it. Anna Mitchell Hedges, right to her death in 2007, stuck to her guns. She kept the same story, details were the same. That was found under an altar in Lebanton in Belize. They were, for their day, reasonably straightforward archaeologists. They weren't Indiana Jones treasure hunters. They were very straightforward people. So they made the best effort they could to record what they found back in the day. So I think the Mitchell Hedges skull is probably a real one. But then it came as a shock that the rest of the skulls don't have much provenance. There aren't many out there that you can say with any certainty are definitely from South America. I've got one, but I don't even know if I'd count that as a real one because I don't have the paperwork and the trail and the photographs for that. But it certainly looks like a real one to me as an archaeologist. So that makes it into the book. Then I encountered another one set in the floor of the ballpark at Koba on the Yucatan Peninsula. And that's definitely real because it's fixed. It's still there. You can't move that one. And then I got an archaeological report, which really took some finding from the South American Archaeological association or whatever, and they were digging on a village outside Mexico City, and they came up with what they called a portable one, which is one that sits in the hand. It's probably just a bit bigger than child size, but then the community out there now has just shut down. They don't tell you what they find. They certainly don't tell you where they find them, because obviously they don't want people going out there and destroying the sites and raiding the sites. And they've had so many of these skulls removed in the past that they really don't want you to know that they're there. So it's getting really hard now with the real ones. And there are tens of thousands of fakes. I try in the book to define what a real skull is compared to a fake one. A real one, it's handmade. It's obviously took a long time to do. They've paid some artistic consideration to the use of the crystal and how they produced it. It's got some kind of provenance from somewhere in the past, so it would have to be sort of 19th century, shall we say, or older. The provenance needs to be an old provenance, and it's not really got to have any industrial era tool marks on it. That's probably the clincher, which is true of all the skulls I've just listed. But then when you start looking at some of the other ones, the ones that are in museums and that, they all have wheel turning marks, grinding marks, file marks, drilling marks, which at the very best, they're probably late Victorian. So they'd be late 19th, early 20th century. But a lot of them go back to a guy called Boban, who was a dealer in Paris. And everything else he sold was real, was genuine. It was all proper South American stuff. So a lot of the stuff, these skulls that are finished up and other things that are finished up in museums, is real. So you look at them and you think, well, yeah, maybe they are real South American, a lot of these other skulls, but they just they're not as old as we think they are. You know, I think there's a lot more study needs doing there. I really do. And you've got to get past this 1970s myth that, you know, they're all gonna come together and then they're gonna light up like they do in you know, the Indiana Jones movie.
Yes,
you know.
wonderful film.
If you watch that Crystal Skull movie, actually, you'll and read the book, you'll see where the scriptwriters got the ideas from. There's a tremendous overlap. I don't agree with the ending on the movie, but a lot of the stuff that's in there, they've obviously done the research and you know, pulled a few facts out here and there and then used them for Hollywood, which is great. You know, it's fantastic.
I can assure you, Mark, that at the end of that film, I wanted to be on that ship. But I have to ask you another question, because most of the listeners may not be fully aware of the Crystal Skulls. Within your mind, Mark, with the original skulls that were created, one, who do you feel created them? And two, for what purpose were they intended?
Of all the ones that I've seen, most of them don't appear to be Mayan or Olmec or Toltec or Zapotec or any of those. Most of them appear to go back to the Aztecs. Now, that is a very broad term. That's like saying, hey, you know, we're British. You know, well, there's lots of divisions within that. But Aztecs, broadly speaking, in style, content, location, that seems to be where the majority of them are coming from. The older ones that we can, you know, trace to any degree. The purpose is an interesting one. They're not all clear. Some of them are milky. Quartz, by definition, comes in different forms. So I think some of them were ritually used in temples, etc., and tie into the Aztec view of life and death, you know, things like the ball game and the human sacrifices, etc. The clear ones are obviously for display. The ones I've seen seem to be handled a lot. They've got a lot of wear and tear on them. The one in the ballpark's been smoothed off. The one I've got smoothed off. The Mitchell Hedges one is so smooth they can't find any tool marks on it, period. So obviously that's been handled and, you know, smoothed off over hundreds of years. So I would say the clear ones are probably, you know, brought out from the sanctuaries, held up in bright sunlight, and, you know, would literally glow. They would have this amazing quality about them. But then you go back to ancient technology. I mean, the book looks at it, you know, quartz has many qualities beyond that. So yeah, maybe there were other uses to them as well. Maybe they knew a thing or two about quartz. And you have this unsettling effect because quartz is electrical. When a skull's produced, it's essentially a round object. So when you approach a crystal skull, it interferes with your electrical field. You can see it on Kirlian photography. You can see this interference between the two. So you are sort of subconsciously, invisibly aware of the skull's presence. I mean, the one in the British Museum was so creepy, they ended up sticking it in its own cabinet. They had to shut the doors on it at night because it was freaking out the security guards and they were losing staff. You know, the people were saying, no, I'm not working here anymore. I think they lost 3 security guards before they decided to lock it up. So they have this door that shuts on it at night. So these things are quite disturbing. They do have a physical register to them.
Yes. Yeah. I think there was some talk of them retaining memory as like, you know, a combination of events in history. I mean, how much we can accept that, we're not sure about that. But certainly your outlook on, you know, not only creation and the advancement of, you know, varied species that grace this planet, and of course civilization, and your thoughts that we go through a stage that, you know, as one civilization goes down, then another one will raise. I mean, how do you see where we are at this point within this time? And I know it's, you know, a very delicate question to ask right now, Mark, but I mean, where do you see us going? And do you see any point? I mean, I know that you obviously understand and believe in an afterlife and the survival of consciousness and so forth, but what about here? What's going on here?
Well, I started writing the book and you know, in the words of a famous television series, I was sat there and I was thinking, we're all doomed. We're all doomed, Captain Mannering. We're all doomed. And then I thought, well, that's a very negative sort of view. Maybe that isn't supported completely by the historical record. And it's not completely supported by the historical record. When you go back, I mean, they flew a military satellite over Egypt and on infrared and discovered that their, whatever it was, 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000 population suddenly turned into 3.5 million because of all the new archaeological sites that they found. The same things happened with the Amazon jungle. They've flown, all kinds of LiDAR and stuff over that. There were millions of people living out in the jungle before it became a jungle. And then you've got these investigators now, they're going under the sea, they're looking at sunken continents and things like that. Again, there's just so many structures there. There must have been millions of people. So you think, okay, meteorite strike, tidal wave, flood, volcanic activity, gravitational anomalies, melting of the ice sheets, all these things are undoubtedly negative, but we're still here. It's all these things have happened. Some of them go back tens of thousands of years, some go back hundreds of thousands of years. Some we've recorded, some we haven't. Almost all of them have caused civilizations to be obliterated. And as many of the civilizations as I've just reeled off that we've got evidence for, there's easily probably 30 times that in civilizations that have just vanished. We haven't got a clue. We've not stumbled across them yet. So it seems to be a tumbling process of rise and fall. So the real question is not whether we're all doomed and this is the end of the world, because that's the zip line on the book, et cetera, and the end of the world. I do deal with it in the last chapter. I don't think that we're ever going to hit a point where the titles roll and it has the end, on the end of it. I don't think we're approaching that kind of apocalyptic finale. But again, back to the pandemic situation under which the book was written, I was thinking, something as tiny and insignificant as a virus or a bacteria or, these microbes absolutely wreak havoc. You've only got to go back to recent history, to the plague, and what have you. They wreak havoc. But it's the planet's way of sorting things out and reaching equilibrium. And I have to say, that our generation may see that equilibrium coming back into play. I don't think it's going to be, World Health Organization or, whatever. I don't think it's going to be anything we do through large organizations. I think that, hats off to the conspiracy theorists because they're throwing out a lot of good stuff. But at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to obliterate ourselves. I think, if anything, it's going to be something else. Out of our control. I mean, the ancients had this idea of judgment. You'll find some form of, judgment is implicit in all the ancient writings of all the cultures. The sky god coughs and we're gone. It's the kind of thing. And I think they were right. I think every so often something like that happens. But this is the worst part. It's completely unpredictable.
Yes, and I agree with you, Mark, there. And, also with the Earth, I mean, as we said earlier, when you're involved with interesting subject matters that really float your boat and you start looking into them, as we said, you end up looking into other areas. And one of those other areas is that at the moment we have, this admittance that, the UAP phenomena is real, but they still don't know what we're dealing with. But also looking at, and I know this sounds very strange, but the Earth system itself, because the Earth, as we know, is a living entity. It's literally given us everything that we have here on terra firma, and whether or not the Earth itself has her own intelligence or is projecting these images, these creating life through whatever method or whatever means. I mean, how do you view that?
I think we are, how can I put it, swimming in a sea of unknowing, I think is the best way of summarizing it. I think there have been humans of our species that have come very close to pushing the boundaries, your Einsteins, your Teslas, etc. I think these guys, fingers on the pulse, they knew where they were going and what they were looking at. But somehow all of that just got swallowed up. We lost it. And I think a lot of individuals who have capacities like that have this nasty habit of vanishing, disappearing.
Yes.
So I think there is, don't want to get into conspiracy really, but there is a group of people out there who do know things that the rest of us don't know for whatever reason. I took my years of experience and the evidence I had available to me, and the conclusion I came up with is that these craft that we're seeing are probably us from the distant past. Because if you had a perfect world with perfect beings, perfect species, etc., you'd pretty much have everything at your disposal. It wouldn't be difficult then to have a rounded understanding of what's going on. That would be time, space, the planet we're living on, the universe that we exist in, etc. You would have that level of understanding almost automatically at the very beginning. And I looked at that and I thought, well, if a particular time period is winding itself up, if it's kind of heading towards a conclusion and there's a change coming, if I was a time traveller, that would be the time I'd most want to go and have a look at. I wouldn't necessarily want to be there at the beginning. I wouldn't want to interrupt the time continuum. Obviously, there are rules, but if I wanted to do something positive, I'd be coming in at the point of change. And certainly these UFOs, UAPs, etc., have been increasing over the last 100, 150, 200 years. They went from individual depictions in illustrations now to, well, they're everywhere. They're absolutely all over the place. And the idea that we now can somehow get hold of this technology and do something with it, that's not out of order if we manage to find one of these craft from the past arriving here now. Again, it kind of explains the idea of them taking people and taking animals and analysing them and looking at them to see maybe how we've changed over time, what the end result is, rather than, interfering with us and all the rest of it. An awful lot of these kind of, loose ends, if you like, start to tie up. You've also got this problem of, it's very difficult to get off planet Earth. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's really, really difficult. Okay.
You got a ticket for us?
Well, yeah. I don't think we're going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
I think Elon's got some good ideas, but I don't think we're going to be eating a Mars bar on Mars anytime soon. I think we're kind of stuck with it. I think the evidence points to that as well. I've never met anybody that's actually managed to get out of the Van Allen belts, but it's a long story. So again, if you're looking within what's available and you're looking within the basic orb of this planet, then the answer is either multidimensional, time travel. It's got to be in those kind of realms.
Agreed.
Subatomic, maybe something that functions on light, gravity, magnetism, etc. It's all those ancient unknowns that those guys back then would almost certainly have known about, but we've lost it. Successive destructions have removed that information away from us. I think that's where the answer lies. Also, it's like what I call the Star Trek syndrome. Every time an alien turns up, it's got one head, two arms, two hands, two legs, 2 feet. They don't look like jellyfish or gas clouds or anything like that. And the thing with Star Trek was that was as far as the budget would go. But the same rationale applies to an awful lot of aliens. They do have a striking resemblance to us in so many respects.
Absolutely.
Especially the guys with the enlarged craniums, the bigger heads. So I was like, well, if it quacks like a duck and it looks like a duck, then shoot, it's a duck. You know what I mean? Yes. Maybe, just maybe they are another version of us.
Yes, that is very interesting. And, I think it's amazing, Mark, the work that you've done and you're doing, the research. And also, I really love that where you're very practical about it, because I'm the same. I try to be as very practical as I can, because in certain areas of ufology or the paranormal or whatever subject matter that you're interested in, you tend to upset the apple cart with other people who have their rigid belief systems. And you're like, well, we need to examine that. We need to explore that to see if there's any validation to those claims that you're making. Another interesting thing that I found recently, Mark, and I want your thoughts on this, is that they're beginning to discover that within the quantum realm, trying to make this as simple as possible, going into superstring theory, that what another researcher, Professor Robert Temple said was that information is coming through from another dimension and then becoming in formation being built through this physical realm. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that, because I thought that was kind of like, quite interesting in terms of like we're in this physical universe, and yet information seems to be, constructing it or building it. What's your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, it goes in two different directions, actually.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I'm going to surprise you by quoting John Lennon and the Beatles. I think one of his lines was, "There's nothing known that cannot be known." So anybody that's involved in science or anything like that, any kind of investigation, you get to this point where you hit a brick wall. You just can't go any further with it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think a lot of the work that's being done now is literally rubbing up against that barrier. We're on that barrier now. Maybe we will eventually drop through the barrier and we will find something that we didn't previously know, some kind of original or mostly original, because I don't think anything's entirely original, something mostly original in terms of discovery and thought. So that's one direction you can go in. The other direction is the information coming through seems to be about the invisible. I think the invisible is a key. Nostradamus prophesied back in the 1400s that one of the biggest discoveries of this particular century would lie in the area of light. Again, that's been followed up by so many people since then, all the way through to Tesla, who said everything is made of wavelengths. It's all about the wavelength. And I think we are living in a very rigidly set, very fixed wavelength, if you like, which has one of those walls at each end of it. So it's very hard to break out. But we are slowly now beginning to discover that there's this vast invisible realm, cats, bats, dogs, you name it, all these other creatures that are living, they don't even see what we see. They're living in a different frequency. And then that's before you get into things like upper atmosphere, deep sea, high temperatures. Life is literally everywhere. And we're kind of sat here scratching our head going, well, how the hell does he do that? What are they seeing? What do they know? How do they function in ways that we don't? And the further we're pushing into that, the more we are discovering the possible existence of the quantum realm. Wormholes, time travel, space, light, everything is not how it appears, literally is not how it appears to be to us. There's so much more, both ends of the rainbow, infrared and ultraviolet, there's the spectrums we do not, on a daily basis, we do not encounter those spectrums. So I think if we, how can I put it? Back to, shooting spacecraft off to Mars and that, that's a waste of money to me. I think what we should be doing is getting down to this globe, this ball that we live on, and absolutely pushing the boundaries. We should be investing time, effort, money, thought in trying to break those boundaries, those walls down, because that's where the future is, quite literally. If we do away with time and space, then the future is ours, literally, and that's where I think we should be going. And so, yes, absolutely. The whole quantum, multiverse, I'm totally behind that as an idea. Absolutely.
Yes. And it reminds me a little bit of the film Contact. And yes, it was just a film with an idea where Jodie Foster, the central character, went through time and space here on Earth. And it wasn't so much as going out of the stratosphere. It was going, through into kind of like wormholes. And I agree with you, because we're not designed to go out into space. I mean, as a kid, I used to wonder what it would be like if I jumped from the top of the planet Earth and if I'd keep falling. And, we have these really strange ideas, but, and I thought, well, would I keep falling, or will I come back on, the bottom of the Earth and come back on top again? And of course, your mind starts to stretch and expand, and you think, hang on a minute, I think I'm losing the plot here. But I agree with you. I agree most definitely. We're not meant to go into space. And I think that you're absolutely right, Mark, in terms that everything, all the secrets to be unlocked is on this planet, through plants, through history, everything is here. And I agree that we have to evolve and find that. It's almost like we have to find that ourselves. I think that's a beautiful way of explaining it.
Yeah, there is actually an irony in that. And the irony is that if I mean, even these guys that would like us to go sailing off, Star Trek style across the galaxy, even those guys are saying the answer to doing that lies within light. So if you like, the keys to the kingdom, the keys to the galaxy, the keys to everything we'd ever want to do, including space travel, if it's ever going to be possible, those keys are back here on Earth. They're here.
Yes.
We just need to understand them. If we can appreciate how light is traveling hundreds of millions of years from a distant galaxy, if we understand what that statement actually entails in scientific terms, in terms of the light itself and the function of light and the abilities of light, then there is just this remote possibility that we will solve space travel. But the idea of firing a tin can out through the Van Allen belt, which is like, chucking it through 10,000 shotgun blasts every second, that's never going to happen. Anything going out of the planet is just going to get shredded or microwaved, depending on who you read, or sucked into some of the other anomalies that are flying around the planet out there in outer space. Inner space, fantastic. That's where all the answers are.
Yes.
So absolutely. I think the answers are here. We're looking in the wrong direction.
I think so. And I agree with you, Mark. And, you mentioned light. Now, that's interesting because people who have a lot of experiences, whether it be shamanic or astral projection or near-death experiences, most of them talk of this light and see this light. And of course, when a lot of UFOs or UAPs, now they change the acronym to a more scientific level of investigations, but they come as lights. And also mediums, the genuine true mediums, see lights around people. So I find that, of course, lights come in different colors. We don't know what the colors mean or, what the representation of those different colors are. But light this is always recorded.
Yeah. I mean, we are designed as a biological entity to interact with light. So anything that's coming from anywhere else, any kind of communication, like you say, when you die, you see lights. When you have encounters, you see ghosts, whatever, aliens. There's always light. There's always this frequency involved. And we're designed as creatures to function like that. So I think that's a direction that we the whole scientific community really, really, really needs to knuckle down and push in that direction, because thereby lies, the profitable pursuit of knocking down some of the walls that are restricting us. I think that's where some of the answers lie. Firing, fueled rockets into space or detonating atomic stuff which damages the planet, or, a lot of the clumsy, old-fashioned technologies that we're using now, that's not where the answer is. I'm quoting Tesla again when I say he could see clearly that the future was in wavelengths, it was in electricity, it was in utilizing the planet for the way the planet's structured, for communication, for energy, etc. Even water, water is a living entity that exists on the planet. There are so many other things out there that they call it fringe science, but it's not fringe science. All science is science. We just need to get to grips with these things more. So I agree. I think light is a commonality.
Yes.
To the human experience, but that's only because that's what we can pick up. It'd be fantastic if we could have an encounter with some being from wherever and measure it electrically. What would we see electrically? What would we see if we had a night vision camera that sees in UV? What other things are going on there? Of course, these things don't happen predictably, and they don't happen enough to be able to do that, which is a shame. But one day we'll know more than we know now.
Yeah, and you're the author of many other books. I mean, Revealing the Green Man, the restoration of the oldest religion of planet Earth, Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries, UFO Chronicles, Crashes, Landings, Retrievals.
You missed out Robin Hood. There's
yes, I've
Life and
got
Times of the
I was just going to say the Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood. I've got it here. There's so many, Mark. I've got to just catch up. And Europe's Roswell.
Yeah.
This incredible number of books that you've researched and written. So I mean, that is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, the Disappearing Ninth Legion's a good one as well. That's about the ghosts, the ghost legion, the Roman ghost legion that marched out of York. Yeah, I love a good mystery. I mean, those books are good because it also annoys me when you watch a documentary and you get to the very end of the documentary and they go, well, we don't really know what the answer is. Boom, there goes your documentary. And you just want to throw your shoe at the TV screen, because it's so annoying. So, Robin Hood, it tells you where he's buried. We decoded that. We understood it. We did it the original way, so that's got an answer. Ninth Legion, we're pretty sure we know where they are. We know where they got wiped out, so there's an answer to that one. The Celtic Warrington books are just a massive voyage of discovery. I mean, there's so much up here in the north of England that just got ignored, basically. The archaeologists didn't think there was anything north of Birmingham, I don't think, for about 200 years. So that kind of plugs the gap there, if you like. The Green Man's an absolute belter. If anybody wants a second book, if they kind of read the one I've got out now, the Crystal Skulls one, and then they want to understand that in a deeper way, get the one on the Green Man, because that will tell you how ancient races, ancient peoples understood the planet they lived on. So again, it's an archaeology book, but it's more than that. It talks about all kinds of ecological and historical issues that I think the mysteries community will find it fascinating. That'd be a good follow-up anyway to the one that's out now.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to get to the other books. I mean, there's so many of them, but one of the things I agree with you, because when I used to watch the Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, they'd build you up, and I've just written about this actually in another book, but I'm working on. But then all of a sudden they'd bring a pen out and he'd burst the balloon, and it's like, oh my Lord, what the hell was that all about? It's like, and then you felt really cheated.
Yeah.
But with your books, you actually come to a conclusion. You actually bring a theoretical idea and you move it forward with the facts and the information that you have, which is very refreshing. You don't leave someone dangling.
No, I used to hate that.
Yeah. So in terms of your future projects, I mean, you said that you're working on something else. So what are you allowed to speak a little bit about that before we come to the end of the show?
Yes, I can. One is a bit of a shout out. You're going to love this. This is it's my retirement fund. So I hope there's a really big, rich publisher out there now that's listening to this and thinks, oh yeah, that's the one for me. I started writing a book in 1977.
Good Lord.
About King Arthur. I think it's 54 years it's taken. No, not 54, 44. 44 years it's taken to complete in total. And I finished it under lockdown. So I've got this book now. It's called The Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph and Arthur. And it's absolutely 110% factual. It's the truth. It just blows the lid off the whole King Arthur thing for real, once and for all, and also at the same time fills in the history of the Dark Ages. So all the stuff that we're told doesn't exist is in this book. They have said in the past that it's too long, but it's not. It's only on small scale publication, standard book size. It's 477 pages. So it's only about 4 times the size of the Crystal Skulls one. So it's not a monster, but I'm having terrible trouble finding anyone that will publish it. Because it is a bit left field, it does upset the apple cart a bit. I think the sort of the Glastonbury, it's all down south mob really are going to fall out with me, but because and that's where the strong publishers are. That's one of my old publishers actually said I can't publish this. I'd never publish anything ever again. But he was a big supporter of the Glastonbury paradigm. So really, I'm looking for a publisher for that. But that's finished. I mean, it's complete finished. It's got a cover. It's got photographs inside it. I could literally just upload it to Amazon. I just don't want to do that. I want to do it quality. I want to run that through a publisher. So that's coming, he says. I mean, I've been saying that for about the last 10 years, but it definitely is coming now because it's done. I finally nailed that. And then I can go a little bit of a leap further. As I mentioned earlier in the interview, I'm working on this book about basically looking at what was the foundation of what we now have as, I suppose it's churchianity now. It's been discoloured and interfered with and so many changes made and what have you. So I'm going to go all the way back, like I say, to the writings of the 1st century. I'm going to have a look at how it started and where perhaps it should have gone and perhaps redefine that for the 21st century. Whether I get that book finished, quickly or not, I don't know, because some of the notes go back to the 1990s. So I'm sort of pulling that one together at the moment. So the Arthur one's finished and that one's coming. I don't really have a title for that. I don't even have a working title. So yeah, they're the ones I'm on at the moment. And then also I'm curating an archaeological display for the Awakening Expo in June, which I think it's the 24th, 25th, 26th, or
Oh, right. Yes, that's
23rd,
right, yeah.
24th, 25th. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if folks want to actually come and talk to me, I mean, that's a great thing. I do like to meet people. I'm at the expo that weekend, so come and find me. I'll probably be stuck in the foyer with all these objects dotted around me. You know, that's kind of how I expect it would be. You know, working.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that Monty Python sketch, you know, where every house should have a poet, you know, and they open the cupboard door under the stairs. There's a poet, you know. Well, every Mysteries UFO conference or whatever should have its own archaeologist. You know, there you go.
Absolutely, and a very well-known and respected one at that, as well as an author and a writer and a TV presenter. And I've got to say, Mark, that, you know, the hour is just upon us. But I want to say to you, first of all, I want to thank you so much for coming on board and having such a wonderful intellectual discussion about, you know, varied subject matters. And you know, your new book, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads: The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World, available through Amazon.
Yep.
And published through Philip Mental's Flying Disc Press. And if there's any big publisher out there, then you need to contact Mark Olly to get hold of his manuscript that's all ready and waiting for you. So how can people get hold of you, Mark?
Okay, it's really, really simple. There's if you want any product, you go to Amazon, because all my stuff's on Amazon, so that's dead easy. Just type my name in, up it comes. If you want to contact me, I will focus in on Facebook. If you want to come and find me on Facebook, there's a distinctive photo of me holding a crystal ball up at the moment, so you'll be able to find that. Everything I do tends to find its way on there. If you want to get in contact with me, drop me a line on Messenger, and I'll give you my email address, and we can take it from there.
Wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads: The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World. Go out and buy the book, and paperback and Kindle. I believe they're both on there. And also, you know, it's just amazing to have you on board. I've wanted to get you on, Mark, for quite a while, and I do appreciate, you know, you having to juggle, because, you know, in life things happen. But it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on board Twin Souls. I really appreciate it so much.
Thank you. I'd be glad to return anytime you need me.
I'm sure we will. And thank you so much to Mark and all of his amazing work, and an amazing man, amazing guy himself. And go out and buy the book. You won't be disappointed. Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. And that remains for me to say. You've been listening to Twin Souls, your host, Philip Kinsella. Be safe and watch the skies.